The galaxy burned. For centuries, the Quetzaltar Dominion had waged war across the stars, crushing civilizations and leaving only ruins behind. They were the undisputed rulers of space, their fleets unstoppable, their armies relentless. No species had ever stood against them and survived. And now, humanity was next. When the Quetzaltar first made contact with humans, they didn't see warriors. They saw a weak, primitive race still crawling out of their own solar system. The Dominion sent an envoy, offering one choice: submission. Humanity refused. The first attack came fast. The outer colonies fell within weeks, burned to ash. The Quetzaltar didn't negotiate. They didn't accept surrender. They exterminated. Earth's leaders called for unity, for resistance. The United Earth Defense Fleet was formed, a last attempt to fight back. But everyone knew the truth. Humanity was outmatched. The Quetzaltar had ruled the stars for too long. They had the numbers, the technology, the experience. And yet, despite all odds, humanity fought. The battle for Mars. Fleet Commander Alexander Steele stood on the bridge of the UES Valor, staring at the holographic display. The Quetzaltar invasion fleet had arrived in force. 30 warships, each larger than anything humanity had built. They had already destroyed Earth's colonies on Europa and Titan. Mars was next. Steele clenched his fists. Open a channel to the fleet. A second later, dozens of faces appeared on the screen. Admirals, captains, squadron leaders. Their expressions were grim, but their eyes burned with determination. "This is it," Steele said. "Mars is the last line before Earth. If we lose here, there won't be a second chance. We hold the line or we die trying." No one spoke. They didn't need to. Outside, the battle began. Human ships, smaller but faster, weaved through the Quetzaltar war machines. Lasers and railgun fire lit up the void. The Dominion ships advanced like a wall of steel, their shields absorbing human attacks. One by one, Earth's frigates exploded under heavy fire. Steele watched as the UES remnant was torn apart by a plasma barrage. Hundreds of lives, gone in an instant. His stomach twisted, but he forced himself to stay focused. "Target their flagship," he ordered. "Full power to railguns." The Valor's main cannons roared, sending hyper-accelerated slugs straight at the enemy command ship. The Quetzaltar vessel shuddered under the impact. For the first time, their shields flickered. "They're not invincible," Steele muttered. "Keep firing." The human fleet fought with everything they had. Despite the losses, they refused to break. Hours passed, and the battlefield was littered with debris. Twisted metal, burning wrecks, drifting bodies. Then, the impossible happened. A Quetzaltar warship exploded. The bridge crew gasped. It was the first confirmed kill against a Dominion capital ship in centuries. A new energy spread through the human ranks. Hope. "We can win this," Steele whispered. "We just need time." Earth's desperate gamble. On Earth, President Lillian Carter stood before a room of advisors, her face pale but resolute. The battle for Mars was raging, and the reports were grim. "We can't hold forever," General Vasquez said. "Our fleets are bleeding. Even if we win this battle, they'll send more." "Then we give them a reason to stop," Carter replied. A silence fell over the room. They all knew what she meant. Dr. Elias Grayson, head of Earth's Secret Weapons Division, cleared his throat. "Project Revenant is untested," he warned. "If it fails." "If we do nothing, we die anyway," Carter said. "Deploy it." Grayson nodded and turned away, sending the order. Deep beneath the surface of Luna Base, scientists activated the most dangerous experiment humanity had ever created. A new kind of weapon, one that could change the war. Now, they just had to survive long enough to use it. The cost of resistance. Back on Mars, Steele's fleet was on the brink of collapse. The Quetzaltar had adapted, their counterattack brutal. The Valor was heavily damaged, fires raging across its hull. Steele himself was bleeding, a gash on his forehead, but he refused to leave the bridge. "We can't retreat," he said. "Earth is behind us." A transmission came through, static-filled but urgent. "This is Luna Base." Grayson's voice crackled. "Commander, you need to hold out for 10 more minutes." Steele gritted his teeth. 10 minutes felt like a lifetime. But he knew one thing. Humanity didn't surrender. He opened a channel to all remaining ships. "We fight to the last ship, the last bullet, the last breath." And they did. The battle raged on, human ships pushing back with suicidal bravery. The XLTAR, for the first time, hesitated. They had expected easy prey, not a species that fought with everything it had. Then the signal came. Grayson's voice rang through Steele's earpiece. "It's done." A pulse rippled through space. Every XLTAR ship within range convulsed. Their systems failed, their engines sputtering, their weapons going silent. One by one, their ships shut down, drifting lifelessly. For the first time in history, a XLTAR fleet was defeated. Steele sank back in his chair, breathing heavily. We won. But he knew this was just the beginning. The XLTAR would not take this loss lightly. They would come back stronger, angrier. The endless war wasn't over. But now, humanity had proven one thing. They wouldn't go down without a fight. The silence after the battle for Mars was deafening. Commander Alexander Steele stood on the ruined bridge of the UES Valor, staring at the lifeless XLTAR warships drifting in the void. Their once mighty fleet had been crippled, their advance halted, not by superior firepower, but by sheer human defiance and Earth's secret weapon. But Steele knew this victory was temporary. The XLTAR were not defeated. They were wounded, and a wounded predator was the most dangerous kind. "Sir, we're getting reports from Earth," Lieutenant Raines said, her voice tight with exhaustion. "Luna Base confirms Project Revenant was a success. The XLTAR systems shut down just as predicted." Steele exhaled, relief and unease mixing in his chest. "And our losses." Raines hesitated. 70% of the fleet destroyed. "Survivors are being picked up," but she trailed off, unable to say it. Steele closed his eyes. Thousands of brave men and women were gone. And for what? A single battle. A brief moment of survival in a war that had lasted lifetimes. A sharp beep from the communications console interrupted his thoughts. "Incoming transmission," Raines reported. "It's from Earth." The President. "Patch her through," Steele ordered. A flickering hologram of President Lillian Carter appeared. Her face was shadowed with fatigue, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Commander Steele, congratulations. You and your fleet have given humanity something we haven't had in years, a victory." Steele straightened. "A costly one, Madam President. The XLTAR won't let this go." "They won't," Carter agreed. "And that's why we need you to return to Earth immediately. Our intelligence confirms what we feared. The Dominion is already preparing a retaliation. And this time, they won't stop at Mars." Steele's jaw tightened. "They're coming for Earth." "Yes," Carter said grimly. "And we have days, maybe less, to prepare." The XLTAR High Command, far beyond human space, on the Dominion homeworld of Selvaris, Supreme Commander Carroll stood before the High War Council. The vast chamber was filled with towering XLTAR leaders, their scaled forms draped in ceremonial armor. The atmosphere was heavy with anger. "The humans," Carroll spat, "have defied the Dominion." A low hiss rippled through the council. No species had ever halted the Dominion's advance, let alone disabled an entire fleet. This was an insult that could not be tolerated. "They used a weapon," one of the counselors sneered. "A coward's tool. Their technology is primitive. They should not have this capability." Carroll's mandibles twitched in rage. "It does not matter how they did it. What matters is that they dared. And now we will show them what it means to defy the Dominion." A massive hologram flickered to life in the center of the chamber, displaying a fleet larger than any the Dominion had ever assembled. Thousands of warships, from planet-crushing dreadnoughts to swarms of smaller attack craft. "This," Cargill growled, "is the end of humanity. We do not invade this time. We do not demand surrender. We erase them. Their planet will burn. Their name will be forgotten. The Dominion will not suffer defiance." The Council roared in approval. The order was given. The fleet would depart immediately. Earth's time had run out. The race against time. Back on Earth, chaos reigned. The news of the Exceltar counterattack spread like wildfire. Cities were evacuated, underground bunkers were fortified, and the remaining human fleet was scrambled for one last stand. Commander Steele arrived at the war room beneath Earth's capital, greeted by the grim faces of Earth's top military minds. President Carter stood at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. "They're coming," Steele said without preamble. Carter nodded. "And we have no way to stop them." Dr. Elias Grayson, the scientist behind Project Revenant, spoke up. "We might have a way. We've been analyzing the Exceltar ships we disabled at Mars. Their technology is interwoven. One disruption spreads like a virus. If we can amplify the effect, we could theoretically shut down their entire armada." Steele leaned forward. "How long?" Grayson hesitated. "We don't have the power to project it on that scale. We need something bigger, the planetary energy source." Steele's stomach sank. "You mean the sun?" Grayson nodded. "We build a pulse array on Mercury, close enough to siphon the sun's energy. When the Exceltar fleet arrives, we trigger it. If it works, their entire fleet shuts down before they can fire a shot." "And if it fails?" Carter asked. Grayson didn't answer. He didn't need to. Steele exhaled. "Then we fight with everything we have." The room was silent. Then Carter spoke. "Do it." The final countdown. Mercury became the center of humanity's last hope. Thousands of workers and scientists worked day and night, constructing the pulse array. The remaining fleet took defensive positions around Earth, ready to die for their home. The countdown began. Then the Exceltar arrived. The night sky over Earth darkened as their fleet blotted out the stars. The sheer size of it was overwhelming. Humanity had fought their ships before, but this was different. This was annihilation made real. Steele, now aboard the newly repaired UES Valor, watched from orbit. "Hold the line," he ordered. "By Mercury time." The battle began. Human ships darted between the massive Exceltar warships, firing everything they had. Explosions bloomed in the void. The Earth defense platforms rained fire, but the Exceltar numbers were too great. One by one, human ships were lost. "Status on the pulse array," Steele demanded. "Almost ready," Grayson's voice came through. "We need 2 more minutes." Steele gritted his teeth. "We don't have 2 minutes." Then, a colossal energy blast from an Exceltar dreadnought struck Earth's orbital defenses. Entire stations were vaporized. And the fleet kept coming. Steele knew what had to be done. "All remaining ships, form up. We're taking the fight to their command ship." It was suicide. But if they could disrupt the Exceltar leadership, they might buy the time Mercury needed. For Earth, the human fleet charged. Explosions rocked space. The Valor weaved through enemy fire, its railguns tearing into the Dominion flagship. More human ships fell, but they did not stop. Then, at the last moment, Grayson's voice rang through the comms. "It's ready." A single order was given. Fire. A blinding pulse erupted from Mercury, washing over the Exceltar fleet. The alien ships flickered. Then, one by one, they went dark. Their weapons, their engines, their shields, everything failed. The impossible had happened. The unstoppable armada had been stopped. Cheers erupted across Earth's remaining forces. But Steele knew better. This was only one battle. The war was far from over. The Exceltar would return. And when they did, humanity would be ready. The silence after the battle was unbearable. The XL-TAR fleet, once a symbol of unstoppable might, now drifted lifelessly through space. A few human warships remained intact, but most were shattered wrecks, their crews gone. Earth had survived, but at a cost too great to measure. Aboard the UES Valor, Commander Alexander Steele stood in the ruined command center, staring at the wreckage of the enemy fleet. The pulse weapon had worked, but barely. If the timing had been off by even seconds, Earth would have been a wasteland. "Status report," Steele ordered, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. Lieutenant Rains, her uniform stained with smoke and blood, wiped her forehead. "Survivors are being picked up, but the fleet. We lost over 80% of our forces. Earth's orbital defenses are gone. If another attack comes..." She hesitated, not wanting to finish the sentence. Steele clenched his fists. They had fought with everything they had, and yet victory still felt like survival, nothing more. A sharp beep from the communications console broke the tension. "Sir," Rain said, her voice trembling, "we're getting a distress signal from the XL-TAR flagship." Steele's brow furrowed. The flagship should have been disabled, powerless like the rest. But the signal was clear. Someone on board was still alive. "Patch it through," he ordered. The screen flickered to life, revealing a battered XL-TAR figure. It was Supreme Commander Carol. Blood dripped from his scaled face, his breathing labored. His once imposing armor was torn, his authority stripped from him in a single moment of defeat. "You have won," Carol rasped, his mandibles twitching in barely controlled rage. "The Dominion will not forget this." Steele crossed his arms. "Your fleet is dead in space. Surrender now, and we can end this without further bloodshed." Carol let out a hissing laugh. "You think this is over, human? You are nothing but insects who have delayed the inevitable. The Dominion will return, and when they do, your planet will be reduced to ash." Steele's expression hardened. He had seen what the XL-TAR did to conquered worlds. He knew their threats were not empty. "Not if we find you first," Steele said. Carol's eyes widened slightly, but before he could respond, the transmission cut out. "Sir," Rain shouted, "the XL-TAR flagship just self-destructed." A moment later, the remains of the Dominion warship erupted in a blinding explosion, sending debris scattering in all directions. Any chance of gathering intelligence, of learning their next move, was gone. Steele cursed under his breath. The XL-TAR had chosen death over capture. That meant they had something to hide. The Council's warning. Back on Earth, the surviving leaders of humanity gathered in the underground chambers of the Global Defense Council. The victory had given them breathing room, but nothing more. President Lillian Carter stood at the head of the table, her face lined with exhaustion. "We stopped them this time. But we all know the truth. This war is far from over." Admiral Kent, the highest-ranking officer left in the fleet, nodded grimly. "The XL-TAR never retreat without reason. If they're regrouping, that means their next strike will be worse. We need to prepare." Dr. Elias Grayson, the scientist behind Project Revenant, spoke up. "We need to find their homeworld. We need to take the fight to them before they can recover." A murmur spread through the room. No one had ever suggested an offensive war against the XL-TAR before. Humanity had always been on the defensive, struggling to survive. Carter folded her hands. "If we wait, we die. If we strike first, we might stand a chance." Steele leaned forward. "Then let's stop waiting." The hunt begins. The next phase of the war had started. Humanity was no longer content to defend. They were going on the hunt. Steele took command of the newly formed Ghost Fleet, a special operations force tasked with one mission: find the Dominion's weak points and destroy them. Their first target was the wreckage of the XL-TAR fleet beyond Mars. If they could salvage anything useful, it could lead them straight to the enemy's hidden strongholds. Aboard the UES Phantom, the Ghost Fleet's stealth frigate, Steele watched as drones scanned the wreckage. The pulse weapon had shut down the XLTAR ships, but some systems might still hold data, coordinates, anything useful. "Sir," a technician called out, "we found something. A transmission log. It's scrambled, but we can trace the origin." Steele's heart pounded. "Where does it lead?" The technician hesitated. "Deep space, beyond known star charts. Somewhere the Dominion didn't want us to find." Steele exchanged a look with Rains. "We're going after them," he said. "No more running. No more waiting for the next attack." Humanity was bringing the war to the XLTAR's doorstep. The UEA's Phantom cut through the void like a silent predator, its hull coated with advanced stealth plating. Commander Steele stood on the bridge, staring at the navigational charts. The coordinates recovered from the XLTAR wreckage led to an uncharted sector far beyond human space, far beyond where any ship had ever dared to go. "Sir," Lieutenant Rains said, standing beside him, "we're approaching the outer edge of the mapped sectors. After this point, there's nothing." Steele exhaled slowly. The Dominion had hidden something out there, something important enough that they were willing to die before letting humanity find it. "Then let's see what they don't want us to see," Steele said. "Proceed." The Phantom's engines flared as it pushed deeper into the unknown. A dead system. Hours passed. The deeper they traveled, the more unsettling the silence became. No signals, no patrols, no signs of life. The XLTAR were known for their ruthlessness, but also for their presence. They had scouts everywhere, drones monitoring every sector. Yet here, there was nothing. Still no activity. Steele asked. "Nothing on scanners," Rains confirmed. "It's strange." Then the alarms blared. "Contact," a technician shouted. "But it's—" He hesitated. "Sir, you need to see this." On the main screen, a massive structure appeared, a station, ancient and lifeless, floating in the void. It was XLTAR in design, but wrong. Its hull was shattered in places, massive chunks missing, as if it had been ripped apart by something far worse than weapons. "By God," someone whispered. "Any signs of life?" Steele asked. "None," the technician replied. "No power readings, no transmissions. Whatever happened here, it happened a long time ago." Steele studied the ruins. This was no ordinary outpost. The XLTAR had abandoned it, erased its location from all records. But why? "Prepare a boarding team," he ordered. "We're going in." The silent graveyard. The Phantom deployed a squad of elite Marines, their boots magnetizing to the derelict station's hull. Steele led the team himself, rifle in hand, stepping through the breached airlock. Inside, the station was a tomb. The walls were covered in claw marks, and the bodies of long-dead XLTAR soldiers floated in zero gravity, their exoskeletons cracked open. "What the hell happened here?" one of the Marines muttered. Rains examined the walls. These marks, they weren't made by weapons. Something tore through them. Steele moved forward cautiously. The deeper they went, the worse it became. Whole sections of the station were obliterated, as if something massive had rampaged through them. Then they reached the central control room and found the message. It was a holographic recording, flickering weakly. Steele activated it. A XLTAR officer appeared, his face twisted in terror. "This is Commander Xelva of the Dominion Science Division. If anyone finds this, leave. Do not go further. We were fools. We thought we could control it. We thought it would obey. But it doesn't serve us. It serves nothing. It is death itself." The message ended in static. "Control what?" Rains whispered. Before Steele could respond, the scanners beeped. "Sir," a Marine said, his voice tight with fear, "we're not alone." In the darkness, something moved. The darkness inside the XLTAR station felt suffocating. Commander Steele's grip tightened on his rifle as the shadows seemed to shift around them. The holographic warning still echoed in his mind. They thought they could control it. But what was it? "Sir, movement detected," whispered Corporal Diaz, his voice barely above a breath. His visor flickered as the scanners picked up something that shouldn't be there. Steele turned, his heartbeat steady despite the growing tension. Where? Diaz hesitated. Everywhere. The Marines instinctively formed a defensive perimeter, rifles raised. The station was supposed to be dead. And yet, something was still here. Then the lights failed. Total blackness swallowed them. And the only sound was the static crackle in their comms. Then, deep in the corridors, something moved. A scraping sound. Slow, deliberate. And then, the screaming began. The unseen terror. Contact. Private Keller fired down the corridor, his rifle illuminating the darkness for mere seconds. The light caught glimpses of something moving too fast, too fluidly, almost like a shadow given form. Then Keller's fire stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Steele turned to see the Marine being dragged into the darkness, his screams distorted by the failing comms. "Fall back," Steele shouted. The squad moved with practiced efficiency, backing toward the control room. But the thing in the darkness wasn't done with them yet. A shape lunged. Too many limbs, too many eyes. Yet nothing stayed solid long enough for the human mind to process. A Marine went down, his body torn in half before he could even scream. Steele fired, but the bullets passed through as if it weren't entirely there. It was shifting, phasing between dimensions. Rains cursed. "What the hell are we fighting?" Then the station's emergency lights flickered back on, dim and failing. But for a moment, just a moment, Steele saw it clearly. It wasn't an alien. It wasn't a machine. It was something else entirely. Something old. Something that didn't belong in this universe. And it had woken up. Escape is not an option. "Move," Steele barked, leading the squad down the corridor. They needed to get back to the Phantom. But as they turned a corner, they saw what was left of the path they came from. Warped, twisted, as if reality itself had been rewritten. The doorway they had entered from was now a solid wall of shifting black matter. "There's no way back," a Marine shouted. Steele clenched his jaw. "We're trapped." Then the thing whispered. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't in their ears. It was in their heads. A voice that was wrong, like static mixed with something ancient. "You are not welcome." The walls started shifting, warping around them. The station itself was changing. Rains pointed ahead. "Commander, the emergency pods." It was a gamble. If they stayed, they died. If they ran, they might die. But Steele wasn't about to die here. "Go," he ordered. The squad sprinted, firing blindly behind them as the darkness chased them. The closer they got to the escape pods, the worse it became. The station was fighting them, twisting hallways, shifting doors. Then, at the last moment, the emergency pod doors slid open. Steele shoved Rains in first, then the rest of the survivors. He turned to see the thing standing at the end of the corridor, watching, waiting. Leave and never return. Steele jumped in, slammed the launch button. As the pod shot away from the station, the nightmare didn't follow. It simply watched. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the entire station folded in on itself, vanishing into nothing. No explosion, no wreckage. As if it had never existed. A dark warning. The Phantom recovered their escape pod, but the moment they were back on board, Steele ordered the ship to jump. He didn't care where. Just away. On the bridge, he stared at the empty space where the station had been. It was gone. Erased from existence. "What the hell was that, sir?" Rains asked. Steele didn't have an answer. All he knew was that the XL-TAR weren't just hiding something. They had been running from it. And now, humanity knew it was out there too. The darkness of space stretched endlessly before them. But to Steele, it felt like it was closing in. The Phantom was running. But was it running fast enough? He stood on the bridge, eyes fixed on the swirling void outside, the place where the Xeltar station had been just hours ago. It was gone now, consumed by something that defied explanation, something that had whispered into his mind, something that knew they had been there. The weight of that knowledge pressed on his chest like a vice. They had survived, but survival did not mean safety. "Commander, jump complete," the helmsman announced, but there was no relief in his voice. "We're clear of the system." Steele turned to the comms officer. "Get me high command. Now." The officer hesitated. "Sir, there's something wrong with our long-range comms. We're getting interference. Heavy interference." Steele frowned. "From what?" The comms officer swallowed hard. "I don't know, sir. It's everywhere. Like the signal is being blocked from outside normal space." A cold chill ran down Steele's spine. He had seen impossible things back at the station. But this was worse. Whatever had been on that station, it wasn't just contained to one place. It had followed them. "Sir," Rain spoke up, walking to his side, her face pale. "You need to see this." She handed him a datapad, and as he glanced down, his blood ran cold. The footage from the station had been corrupted. Not destroyed, corrupted. The video files glitched and warped, showing distorted images of his own team. Faces stretched into inhuman forms, movements that didn't match what had actually happened. And in the background, that shape, the thing that had whispered into their minds, was there in every frame, standing in places where it should not be. Steele clenched his jaw. "Tell me this is a malfunction." Rain shook her head. "It's not, sir. This is something else." Steele exhaled sharply. He turned to the rest of the bridge crew. "No one talks about what happened on that station. Not a word until we get back to command." "But sir," Diaz spoke up hesitantly, "what if they already know?" Steele stared at him. The thought made his stomach turn. What if High Command had known? What if the Teltar station had been more than just an abandoned relic? What if it had been a prison for something that should have never been found? The idea settled over him like a heavy shadow. "Keep scanning for any anomalies," he ordered. "I don't care if it's a whisper in the dark or a shadow where there shouldn't be one. If anything happens, I want to know immediately." The crew nodded, but the fear in the air was thick. They had faced enemies before, battleships, alien warlords, planetary invasions. But this was different. This wasn't an enemy they could shoot. It wasn't a battle they could win. Steele rubbed his temples. He could still hear the whisper, faint but persistent, as if it had burrowed into his mind. "You are not welcome." For the first time in his military career, Steele wasn't sure if humanity had won a battle, or if they had just awakened something far worse. "You said 7. ChatGPT said. The phantom drifted in the void, surrounded by an eerie silence that felt unnatural. Every member of the crew could feel it, the sensation that something was wrong. It wasn't just fear. It was something deeper, something primal, like an instinct screaming at them to run. But there was nowhere left to run. Commander Steele stood in the war room, watching the flickering holograms of their situation. The ship's systems were stable, but long-range communication was still down. Worse, the scans had picked up something trailing them. Not a ship, not a fleet, something else, something that the sensors couldn't fully define. It was there, but not really. It moved, but not in any direction that made sense, and every time they tried to analyze it, the data came back wrong. Rains sat at the console, typing furiously, trying to make sense of the readings. "Sir, I don't think this is a signal jammer or a malfunction. It's like space itself is being distorted. Something is bending reality around us." Steele's jaw tightened. "And is it following us?" She hesitated before nodding. The silence in the room deepened. "What do we do?" Diaz finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Steele exhaled, thinking fast. He had been in impossible situations before. Wars where the enemy had superior firepower, where humanity had been outnumbered, where all logic said they should have lost, and yet they had found a way to win. This had to be the same. "We assume it's hostile," he said firmly. "Until we know otherwise, we treat this as an enemy. And if it is an enemy," his eyes hardened, "then we find a way to kill it." Diaz swallowed. "Sir, with all due respect, how do we kill something that doesn't exist the way we do?" Steele looked at the flickering data on the screen. That was the question, wasn't it? Before he could answer, the lights flickered. A low hum vibrated through the ship's hull. Every screen and console flashed with static before a single symbol appeared, a shape no one recognized, yet it filled them with dread. And then, the whisper came, a voice not from the speakers, but inside their minds. "You were warned." The crew recoiled as the ship lurched violently, alarms blaring. The lights dimmed, turning red as emergency systems activated. "Report," Steele barked. "The entity, it's inside our systems," Rain shouted. "It's hijacking our controls." Steele turned sharply. "Shut it out. Lock down the core." Rains worked fast, hands moving over the console. But the ship continued to shake, and the whisper grew louder, like a chorus of voices speaking in a language older than time. Steele clenched his fists. Humanity had fought gods before, conquered the impossible, defied extinction at every turn. And this was no different. "Get ready," he growled, "because whatever this thing is, it just made a mistake." Diaz blinked. "Sir, it made us its enemy." The Phantom drifted in the void, its engines humming softly as it moved through the dead silence of space. The crew had been through hell, but they were still alive. That was more than they could say for the enemy. The war had pushed humanity to the brink, tested them beyond their limits, but they had refused to break. They had fought against overwhelming forces, against impossible odds, and now they were still standing. Commander Steele sat in the war room, staring at the tactical display. The enemy fleet was gone, shattered by the final battle. The war was over, but something didn't feel right. Rains stood at the console, running final checks. "Sir, long-range scans show no more hostile fleets in the sector. No distress signals, no transmissions. It's quiet." Steele nodded slowly. Too quiet. After years of constant battle, the silence felt unnatural. Diaz, standing near the viewport, let out a heavy sigh. "We actually did it, didn't we?" His voice was filled with disbelief. Steele didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the room at his crew, his soldiers, his family. They had all suffered. They had lost friends, lost entire worlds, but they had endured. "Yeah," Steele finally said. "We did it." The weight of those words settled over them. They had won. Humanity had done what no one thought possible. They had faced an unstoppable war and refused to lose. But as the Phantom moved forward, something flickered on the edge of the sensors. A signal. Faint, almost undetectable. Rains frowned. "Sir, I think you need to see this." Steele moved closer, eyes narrowing as he watched the data stream. It wasn't an enemy transmission. It wasn't even from the battlefield. This signal was coming from deep space, far beyond any known colonies, beyond any explored territory. Steele's gut tightened. "What is it?" Rains hesitated before responding. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's old. Really old." The room fell silent. Diaz shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe it's just an old distress beacon." Rains shook her head. "No, it's too complex for that, and it's repeating in intervals, like it's waiting for a response." Steele stared at the data, his instincts screaming at him. The war had been long, brutal, but deep down, he knew wars didn't just end. There was always something more, always another fight waiting in the dark. He took a deep breath. "Send a probe. Let's see what we're dealing with." Rains nodded, working quickly. Within seconds, the probe launched, vanishing into the void toward the unknown signal. Minutes passed. Then the probe's signal came back. The crew gathered around the screen as the first image came through. A structure, massive, ancient, floating in the abyss, untouched for millennia. And then something moved inside it. The screen glitched for a second, and a new transmission came through. Not static, not noise, a voice. Low, cold. You were not supposed to survive. The Phantom's alarms blared as the entire ship trembled. Steele's blood ran cold. The war was over, but something far worse was about to begin.